Killers are everywhere. It could even be the kind nurse who's in charge of your recovery. If you don't believe me, stay to see this story based on the real events of Lucia de Burke, a Dutch nurse who was convicted of several homicides, or so the world was led to believe. Set in the early 2000s, the film takes us to a city in the Netherlands where Lucia de Burke works as a pediatric nurse at Westland Hospital. She's very good at caring for babies, far more responsible than her colleagues, often working overtime when needed. And she doesn't stop working even when she's off duty because she usually visits her convalescent grandfather to tend to his ailments. One night in the hospital, Timo, a baby with breathing problems, suffers a collapse. Lucia immediately tries to stabilize him while waiting for Dr. Koves, the specialist, or so she is supposed to be, though she does almost nothing for the child, assuring everyone that Timo is getting better. Shortly after, the baby suffers another collapse, but this time Lucia can't save him. From then on, we learn a sinister detail about Lucia. This isn't the first time a patient has died under her care. However, she's also the one who feels most distressed by these tragedies, and because she's quite superstitious, she believes she attracts death. On the other hand, we meet Judith, a young prosecutor who wants to prove her talent but has been stuck in an office doing paperwork. Her situation finally changes when her superior, Ernestine, takes her to investigate the mysterious death of the baby at Westland Hospital. Because Lucia was suspended after the incident, the prosecutors speak to her coworkers. They don't accuse Lucia directly, but they do describe her as someone very solitary and mysterious. After seeing Timo's parents mourning their loss, a doctor tells the prosecutors that the baby's death was not from natural causes. He found digoxin, a lethal chemical, in the baby's blood. However, the body shows no needle marks or anything similar. The hospital director then confirms his suspicion about Lucia. At her previous workplace, another baby had also died under her care. In addition, she had performed more than 15 resuscitations. Combined with her statistics at Westland, which point to her as the main culprit, Dr. Koves also joins the investigation, assuring them that Timo was doing fine right before she left him in Lucia's hands. Poor Lucia finds out about all this in the worst way, on the news where she's accused of alleged homicide. Ernestine is quite upset with Jaap because she had clearly told him not to go public with the case without solid evidence. But the inexperienced Judith believes she did the right thing, based on the testimonies they had heard incriminating the nurse. Elsewhere, the young prosecutor goes to Lucia's apartment with Detective Voss and other investigators. Pitt, Lucia's boyfriend, tries to chase them away by saying she isn't there, but the investigators enter anyway. Beyond the messy apartment and a few books about serial killers, Judith is stunned to find Lucia's diary, where she reads a phrase that sounds more than suspicious. "No one must know my secret. It will die with me." Months later, we see that Judith and Ernestine have installed microphones in Lucia's grandparents' apartment. Everything seems normal until they hear Lucia about to give her grandfather a medication that could be lethal in high doses. Fearing the worst, a police squad rushes to the apartment to arrest her. In the interrogation, she's harassed by detectives Ron and Voss, who consider her a suspect due to her past as a sex worker and for having left her daughter Fabienne with the girl's biological father. Without realizing it, they reopen old wounds. When Lucia was a teenager, she fled her abusive father along with her mother and younger siblings. But because money was scarce, her mother forced her to sell her body. Lucia refuses to divulge more information to the investigators. Branded by the press as the angel of death, Lucia is imprisoned while the truth is sorted out. Shortly after, Lucia's grandfather passes away. Ernestine wants to deliver the news to her personally to see how she reacts, but by a stroke of bad luck, it's Judith who ends up informing her of this tragedy. Lucia's reaction does nothing to help her. She pulls down her pants in front of the prosecutor, sits on the toilet, and shows no emotion. Yet the moment she's alone, Lucia breaks down crying. Meanwhile, Judith keeps searching for evidence against the nurse and discovers that Timo's heart monitor was turned off for about 30 minutes shortly before his death. That means Lucia could have injected poison via IV drip during that time. If that murder is proven, all other alleged homicides by Lucia could be confirmed. Thanks to that heart monitor proof, Lucia is put on trial. Despite her claims that Timo was already gravely ill, She's sentenced to life for the murders of several babies and elderly patients who died under her watch in other hospitals, not to mention additional charges of attempted homicide. As soon as she arrives in prison, she's forced to strip naked by guards who despise her for her crimes. After that, she's taken to what will be her new home for life, a tiny cell with nothing but a mattress and a toilet. Even though her career advances thanks to having won the Lucia case, Judith starts doubting when she learns that Dr. Coves suffers from clinical depression, meaning her testimony might not be fully reliable. Determined to get to the truth, Judith visits Westland Hospital, where Karina, another nurse, confides in her privately that Lucia was always an excellent professional and had disconnected Timo's monitor when Dr. Coves came to see him. Karina believes Lucia was used as a scapegoat so that a scandal of this magnitude wouldn't sabotage the hospital's merger with another facility. Now that the case has changed dramatically, Judith requests the original records of the suspicious deaths. Back in prison, Lucia receives a surprise visit from Quirin, a lawyer interested in her case because of the media chaos it has generated. Typically, when so many people believe in a single truth, there's something more complicated lurking behind it. In other words, collective hysteria is what sent Lucia to prison, not real evidence. Inspired by his words, Lucia sets out to help her new lawyer, who manages to get her removed from solitary confinement. Now she shares a cell with Jenny, a fellow inmate who also wants to help Lucia. A couple of years later, there's an appeals hearing for Lucia. Jap is questioned, and it becomes clear he knows almost nothing about the hospital's daily routine, though he's quick to cite the statistics that incriminated Lucia. Feeling cornered, the director is then shielded by Ernestine, who claims that those statistics are no longer important to the case, undoing much of the defense team's progress. On another day, Judith returns to Westland Hospital to speak with the same doctor who declared Timo's death to be from poisoning. However, a second test revealed that when he died, the baby's heart was already at rest, with no trace of digoxin. Judith immediately shows these findings to her boss, arguing that Lucia was unjustly imprisoned for a poison never found in the victims' bodies. Ernestine, however, thinks otherwise, claiming that Lucia deserves to be in prison for her troubled history, her work in prostitution, and the resentment she supposedly felt toward her mother. Of course, Ernestine has no idea that Lucia's mother was the one who forced her into sex work. Months later, there's another appeal hearing. This time, Judith is forced to keep a low profile because her superiors are upset that she's been investigating on her own. In the courtroom, Quirin insists that Lucia was always assigned patients with very low survival chances, and that death is inevitable in hospitals. He also argues that they must focus on clear evidence, rather than speculation about his client's private life. Lucia feels a glimmer of hope, but it all comes crashing down with the judge's ruling. Lucia's life sentence is upheld for 7 murders and multiple attempted murders. This time, the nurse can't hold back her emotions. She shouts that she never committed these crimes as she's taken from the courtroom. However, when the system wants you locked away, there's little you can do. Judith contacts Quirin to share the case information, even though it goes against her job. She tells him about Timo's second test, which proves Lucia's innocence, and which Ernestine keeps under lock and key. All that remains is to retrieve it and present it to the Supreme Court. The next day, Judith creates a distraction to sneak into her boss's office, where she finds the test results. But on her way out, she's intercepted by Antoinette, a colleague who forces her to empty her bag. Judith had planned for this and had hidden the papers under her sweater, leaving the building without trouble. Afterward, she visits Lucia in prison. The nurse distrusts her naturally because Judith was the one who helped convict her in the first place. Her resentment is so deep that she refuses to listen. But then Judith shows her the real Timo test results, the proof of her innocence, and tearfully apologizes for having convicted her unjustly, admitting that her eagerness to win her first case clouded her judgment. Back in her cell, Lucia dances with excitement. She feels more hopeful than ever. Later, in the prison sewing workshop, Lucia's cellmates show they trust her by handing her a crying baby, child of one of the inmates. In seconds, she calms the little one, telling them she knows how to hush a baby, real proof of her sense of humor. We jump ahead to 2006, and another obstacle appears for our protagonist. The Supreme Court dismisses Timo's second test because they only saw it after the verdict. They can't modify a case unless there was a legal error, and unfortunately, there was no legal error in Lucia's case. She loses all hope, becomes depressed, and starts suffering from dizzy spells. The guards pay her no mind. Pitt and Fabian grow increasingly worried about her because they haven't heard from her in a while. Judith confronts her superiors, believing they're hiding which hospital Lucia has been taken to in her weakened condition. While Judith does manage to find out where she is, Ernestine fires her for all her infractions. Thanks to Judith's sacrifice, Pitt and Fabian are able to visit Lucia. Meanwhile, Quirine reopens the case, giving all the information to the press, who shift from crucifying Lucia to seeing her as a victim of the system. Many people now support her, gathering outside her cell to show their solidarity. Finally, in 2010, Lucia is released when the evidence, or rather, the lack thereof, makes it clear she never committed the murders. She walks out of the courthouse, thrilled, hand in hand with Pitt and her daughter, while a swarm of journalists surrounds them. A few meters away, Judith observes everything, satisfied to have redeemed herself for her mistake. In the epilogue, we learn that Lucia spent 6 years and 3 months in prison in total. Neither the prosecutors nor her former colleagues were punished for having testified against her, but they all apologized, especially the higher-ups in the criminal justice system. After her release, Lucia married Pitt and became a grandmother via her daughter Fabian. These days, together with her lawyer, Lucia gives lectures to law students.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.